Hey guys, welcome back for another topic review, the quick and the dirty. Right, so this is for our next unit. Technically, I think it's called something along the lines of from molecules to organisms. I think that's the title of the unit. Doesn't really matter. The specific title here is matter cycling and energy transfer. Okay? So it's kind of a mixed bag of things. I'm going to go through the bullet points of topics, just like the other two videos, and just bang out some information, foundational stuff. Again, that's the purpose of these things, just to refresh your brain all going into this wonderful CAS exam that we have coming up next week. So the first point that I want to hit is define the levels of organism structure from cells to organ systems. And so these are the categories of structures that we have in our bodies as organisms. Right? These are for multicellular organisms specifically. It starts with the smallest unit of life, which is a cell. Right? An individual cell is membrane bound. That's important because it keeps the interior conditions separate from the outside conditions. And that's true for prokaryotes and multicellular organisms. Right? The inside of each of our individual cells is different from the conditions outside that cell. Right? And so the conditions of the blood next to the cell is different from inside the cell. And that's important for the function of the cell itself. If you take a bunch of different types of cells, like let's say heart cells, right? And heart cells have their own unique hearty shapes, right? You put them together to work together in a big conglomerate, you call that a tissue. So you put together a bunch of heart cells, you get yourself a heart tissue. You take these tissues and you put them together, right, to create a discrete unit, right, a discrete thing inside your body that has a specific function based on the shape of the tissues, which are based on the shape of the cells. And you have yourself an organ. So you take a bunch of heart cells, you put them together to form a heart tissue. You take a bunch of heart tissues, you put them together, you get yourself a heart. Okay? That's an organ. Now you take different organs with their own unique functions, okay, and you put them together because maybe those functions are related, and you have yourself an organ system. Right? Like you have the respiratory system, which includes your lungs, your esophagus, and your trachea, and your nose, and your mouth, and all the breathy things. Right? You can also have combined organ systems. So you have your respiratory circulatory system combination. So your heart's pumping the blood through all of your veins and arteries, right? And your respiratory system is exchanging the gases between that blood, and that's being moved around. So that's also a type of organ system. You put together all your organ systems and you get your full body. Cool? All right, next topic here is identify and communicate the primary functions of the four major categories of organic macromolecules, which are proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and lipids. And so carbohydrates' primary function is to serve as a short-term energy storage unit. Carbohydrates are things like sugars and starches. Right? You break down a sugar, it releases a little bit of energy that you can use. It stores a little bit of energy, but you can get it right away. It's short-term energy storage. So carbohydrates are also utilized in structural components of organisms. Right? Plants, for instance, utilize a carbohydrate called cellulose to make themselves stiff. Right? So cellulose is what makes the plant stiff. It's very long chains of very uniform carbohydrates, and they interlock in a way that makes them nice and tight and stiff. Okay? They're also found embedded in the cellular membrane, doing communication stuff for the cells. Right? Then we move on to lipids. The function of lipids is long-term energy storage. So lipids are longer molecules than our carbohydrates, so they hold more energy, but it takes more time to break them down and release that energy. And so whenever we have an excess of energy available in our body, we'll store that energy in the form of lipids, which are fats and oils and such things. Okay? So the main function of lipids is long-term energy storage. They also play a huge role in cell structure, right? Phospholipids are the foundation of our cell membrane. A lot of hormones, steroidal hormones, are also lipid-based, which are very important for cellular communication in our body. Right? So these lipids don't get broken down in water, right? They're hydrophobic, so they can persist in our body for a long time. So I can send a signal from my pineal gland down to my stomach if I need to. Right? It doesn't break down along the way. Moving on to nucleic acid. These are DNA and RNA, and also ATP, but that's put to a different side because that's a little bit different than the typical nucleic acids. And their function is genetic storage. Right? It holds the information, DNA and RNA. That's pretty straightforward. That leaves us with our last group, which is proteins. Proteins are primarily a structural component of our beings, right? I prefer to describe them as being the acting agent of genetic expression because all of our DNA coding is to make proteins. Right? And so proteins give us all of our traits. All of the things that we are is because of the physical body that is proteins. And so any of our trait functions are determined by the functions of those proteins, even though they're coded for by DNA. Another very important function that proteins play are as enzymes. Right? And enzymes are protein catalysts, which moves us straight into this next bullet point here, which is define enzymes as proteins that speed up chemical reactions such as photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Okay? So enzymes are a very specific type of protein that each enzyme has its own shape. And what this shape does is it will take two molecules, right? And these two molecules can come together to combine, or I can take one molecule and rip it apart. But either way, if I have molecule A and I have molecule B, left to their own devices, they'll click together and become molecule AB. But what an enzyme does is it speeds up that process. Right? It makes it more likely that molecule A and molecule B will click together. So if usually it would take like 10 minutes of them randomly floating around and then bumping into each other the right way, adding these enzymes in goes around and grabs them, right? Changes their shape a little bit to make them more likely to stick together and shoves them together. So instead of 10 minutes, maybe it takes 45 seconds, right? And it does this by reducing the activation energy required for the reactions. So every reaction requires a certain amount of input of energy, and having a protein that is shaped the right way, floating around in your cell, helps reduce the amount of energy needed. So it just increases the likelihood that A and B meet up, and that they happen to meet up in the right shapes at the right times to click together. Right? So if you think of them like Legos, right? I have two Legos that fit together, right? And they go like this, boom. If they fit like that, boom, they stick together, right? But a Lego might bump into it like this, or it could bump into it like this, or it could bump into it like that, right? If the Legos aren't bumping into each other in the right shape formation, they're not going to stick. The same is true for molecules, right? And so what the protein does, what the enzyme does, is make sure that they're lined up like this and they click together. Okay? Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Next bullet point asks us to identify the products and reactants of photosynthesis using basic word and chemical equations. Okay? So when we're talking about the products and the reactants are the things that are going into the reaction, the products are the things that are coming out. So for photosynthesis, the reactants are water and carbon dioxide. In the presence of sunlight, will create the products of glucose and oxygen. Cool? That's it. That's our simple chemical formula right here. Doesn't have any moles or numbers or anything. Yeah, but this is what it is. And here are our words because that's what the prompt asked for. Cool? That's it. Use models to show that carbohydrates are used to produce usable energy and to build starches and cellulose for plants. So what I've drawn here is what's called a monosaccharide. It's the monomer of carbohydrates. It's just basically one sugar. And each sugar ring has some bonds in it. Right? These carbons are connected to one another via covalent bonds. Those bonds required energy input to be made. And the laws of thermodynamics tell us that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So the energy that was utilized to build these bonds is effectively stored within these bonds. It's not the reality of how it actually works, but that's how the effect makes it seem. Okay? So if you break these bonds, the energy comes back out and it's available for work. Right? So this is how we use sugar as a storage unit for energy. When we do the process of cellular respiration, we are breaking apart these sugar bonds and releasing that energy. Now, that energy could just float away and we could do nothing with it, but that would be silly. Right? And so, what our body does through the process of cellular respiration is it harnesses that energy, it catches that energy, and it uses that energy to create the molecule ATP. So we have ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, di meaning two, because I have two phosphates on there. I take the energy from my carbohydrate breaking apart, and I use that energy to slap that last phosphate onto that ADP. It becomes ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. And now I have those three phosphates on there. And we use that molecule to do cellular work because then if I rip that last phosphate off, that energy that was stored in that little bond right there is also released. Next, bullet point tells us to create a labeled model or diagram showing the processes of photosynthesis. All right, so here I've drawn a beautiful plant cell. You can tell it's a plant cell because I've drawn a rigid cellular wall around it. Okay. Inside of my plant cell, I have the organelle, the chloroplasts. Okay, so I've drawn 4 chloroplasts in this plant cell. I zoomed in on my chloroplast here. Okay, so this is one chloroplast. Inside of the chloroplast are the thylakoids, which are these stacky pancake-looking things, and the stroma, which is just the space between the stacky pancake things. Right? And so I like to think of this in the terms of like a city landscape, where the thylakoids are the buildings, and the stroma are the streets beneath the building, right? And the air in the area around the streets. So the photosynthesis process is broken down into 2 steps. The light reactions occur within the thylakoid, and the light reactions catch sunlight using the pigment chlorophyll. That sunlight excites electrons within that pigment. Those excited electrons are carrying energy now, and that energy is used to make another molecule called NADPH. And that molecule is effectively just a short-term energy transfer molecule. So that is now holding that energy that was caught from the sunlight, and it falls out of the thylakoids and out into the stroma, where the Calvin cycle occurs. And the Calvin cycle uses the energy available in that NADPH to rip apart carbon dioxide and then use those carbons and shove them all together to make sugars. Right? Like in the step above, we saw that sugar ring. Those carbons were shoved together using the energy from sunlight. Okay? That's what used to form the bonds. Okay? And so now I have my cute little sugar that's holding a bunch of energy. And my last prompt asks to explain that ATP is used for cell movement, growth, and repair. And so organization requires an energy input. Things by nature want to become more disordered. Things fall apart when left to their own devices, right? That's entropy. As living things, we need to stay ordered, right? We need to be organized. That's what we are, just a big system of organization. And so we need to input energy into certain mechanisms to keep that order. We get that energy at a cellular level from the ATP molecule that we drew above. And so if we want to grow, we need to make more cells. Right? There are certain components inside the cells, they're like little machines that need to be powered. Right? And you achieve any function through the alteration of shape. Right? All function is determined by shape. And so if I have a little molecule and its job is to pump protons across a membrane, right? It's shaped one way to grab a proton. but then it needs to change shape to move a proton, right? I can't throw a football without moving my arm, right? Same idea. ATP, that last P, okay, I can take that last P, I can put it on the molecule. I can put it on the machine. And by putting it on the machine, it changes the shape of the machine. Okay? And so it'd be like me putting my arm back for the football, I put the phosphate on, and it changes my arm shape, and boom, forward goes the football. Right? And so all of our functions are derived from these cellular level changes in shape. And all of these changes in shape occur through the use of phosphorylation and ATP. A little bit of energy is released when we do it, and we kind of say that we use that energy for that work. Okay? And so that's what ATP is doing. We use that ATP to grow, to move, and to repair. And that's it for this unit topic review. Bye.